Listen closely, for I'm about to tell you something they don't teach in university corridors or whisper in therapy sessions. It begins with a riddle older than civilization itself, carved into the bones of our ancestors. Why does the moth circle the flame? Not because it seeks death, but because it cannot comprehend a light that doesn't love it back. Jung understood this. Oh, how he understood. In the velvet-draped consultation rooms of Zurich, where the air hung thick with pipe smoke and unspoken confessions, he witnessed the same tragedy play out 1,000 times. Men arriving broken, bewildered, asking the eternal question, why does she test me? Why is nothing ever enough? The answer, my weary friend, lies not in what women want. That's the wrong question entirely. The answer lies in what the universe demands of consciousness when it splits itself in two to experience love. Picture this. In ancient Babylon, they tell of Inanna descending into the underworld, stripping away 7 veils, each representing a layer of illusion. But here's what the scholars miss. She wasn't testing her lover Dumuzi. She was testing existence itself. And when she emerged, naked and reborn, she found him lounging on her throne, untransformed. So she condemned him to take her place in the darkness, not out of cruelty, but out of cosmic necessity. For how can the initiated love the uninitiated? How can someone who has died and been reborn embrace someone who still believes in the comfort of surfaces? This is what modern men call shit tests. Such a crude term for such an elegant torture. Like calling the Sistine Chapel some paint on a ceiling. These tests are not obstacles. They are invitations to transformation. But oh, how men hate transformation. They want love to be a destination, not a journey through glass shards. A 2024 study from the Institute of Relationship Dynamics found that 73% of men interpret female emotional complexity as manipulation. But manipulation implies conscious intent. What if I told you it's deeper than that? What if I told you it's as unconscious as breathing, as inevitable as autumn? Consider the peacock spider, a tiny Australian creature that dances for hours, risking death, displaying colors that shouldn't exist in nature. The female watches, judging not just the dance, but the dancer's willingness to die for beauty. She's not cruel. She's ensuring that life itself remains worth living. For what is existence without stakes? What is love without the possibility of annihilation? Jung wrote in his Red Book, that forbidden tome of personal madness, about the anima, the feminine soul within every man. But here's what he whispered only to his closest students. The anima doesn't want to be understood. She wants to be danced with, and the dance requires you to lead while blindfolded, to be strong while surrendering, to remain solid while dissolving. I knew a man once, let's call him Marcus, who spent 7 years trying to solve his wife. He read every relationship book, attended every seminar, memorized the 5 love languages like they were military codes. Yet she grew more distant with each passing month. One night, in desperation, he simply stopped. Stopped trying to fix. Stopped trying to understand. Instead, he looked at her across their kitchen table, the same table where they'd argued about money, sex, and whose turn it was to call the plumber, and said, "I don't understand you. I never will, but I'm here." She wept, not from sadness, but from relief. Finally, he had passed the only test that mattered, the willingness to stand in the mystery without demanding a map. You see, women test men the way fire tests gold. Not to destroy, but to reveal what cannot be destroyed. Every challenge, every emotional storm, every moment where she seems impossibly complex is asking one question. Can you hold space for the fullness of life, or do you need me to be simple so you can feel safe? The tragedy is that most men want women to be vending machines. Insert kindness, receive sex. Insert commitment, receive peace. But the feminine principle is not a machine. It's the ocean itself, and you cannot negotiate with the tide. Here's something they discovered in a 25 neurological study that made headlines for exactly 3 days before being buried. When women experience emotional intensity, Their brains show activity patterns similar to shamanic trance states. They're not being irrational. They're accessing non-ordinary states of consciousness, and they're inviting you to join them there. But you keep showing up with your clipboard and your logic, like someone bringing a dictionary to a symphony. Tell me, truthfully, and I mean truthfully, in that 3 a.m. way when all your masks have melted, when was the last time you let yourself be undone by anything? When did you last allow uncertainty to remake you? Men think strength means being unmovable, but watch the trees in a storm. The oak breaks, the willow dances. Which would you rather be when the feminine hurricane arrives at your door? Jung knew this secret. The tests never end because transformation never ends. The moment you think you've figured her out, you've already failed. The moment you believe you've passed all her tests, you've revealed yourself as someone who thinks love is an exam rather than an eternal becoming. So here's your first dark truth, served cold as cemetery stone. Women will always test men because consciousness itself demands evolution. And evolution requires pressure. You can either be the coal that crumbles or the diamond that forms. But please, stop asking why the pressure exists. That's like asking why gravity pulls or why time moves forward. It simply is. And in that isness lies either your doom or your liberation. Do you have the courage to be destroyed and remade, over and over, in the furnace of relational alchemy? Or will you join the legion of bitter men who mistake the invitation to greatness for an assault on their comfort? The choice, as always, is yours. But choose quickly. The dance has already begun, and she's watching to see if you know the steps. Every reflection costs a piece of soul, yet men queue up to pay. There's an old Romanian folktale they don't tell anymore, too disturbing for our sanitized age. A young shepherd finds a mirror in the mountains, perfectly clear, impossibly beautiful. Each time he gazes into it, he sees himself as women see him, not his face, but his essence. The first look shows him as a hero, the second, a child, the third, a monster. By the seventh look, there's nothing left but shadow. They found him weeks later, still staring, having forgotten how to see himself through his own eyes. This is what happens when men make women their mirrors. Jung called it projection, but that clinical term does nothing to capture the horror of it. Just imagine walking through life with no internal compass, no sense of self except what reflects back from feminine eyes. It's like being a vampire, but instead of blood, you feed on validation. And just like vampires, you cease to exist the moment no one's watching. I'll tell you something grotesque but true. In the basement archives of a certain Swiss institute, there are recordings from the 1960s. Jung's late sessions, never meant for publication. In one, a successful banker weeps like an infant, confessing, "When she looks at me with disappointment, I become disappointing. When she admires me, I exist. When she turns away, I am nothing." Jung's response? A long silence, then, "So you have given her the power of a god. How exhausting for both of you." The feminine tests because men keep handing over their self-worth like car keys to a valet. "Here, you drive my sense of identity. I'll wait here in the lobby of my own life until you bring it back." But here's the sick joke. Women don't want this power. It's like being handed a still-beating heart and told, "Keep this safe for me." What are they supposed to do with it? They test to see if you'll take it back, if you have the courage to reclaim your own reflection. Each test is really asking, are you going to make me responsible for your existence? Or will you finally grow a spine of your own? A 2025 meta-analysis of relationship dynamics revealed something chilling. Men who score highest on relationship satisfaction metrics show the lowest levels of individual identity markers. They're happy because they've achieved perfect symbiosis, which is another word for parasitism. They've found a host. Let me paint you a picture that will haunt your dreams. There's a man, let's call him David, who texts his girlfriend every decision. "Should I wear the blue shirt or the gray? Is it okay if I go to the gym? My boss offered me a promotion, but it means more hours. What do you think? He believes this is love, this constant checking in. She believes it's a prison where she's been made the warden against her will. One night, she breaks. Just decide something, anything, without me. He stares at her, genuinely confused. But I thought you wanted to be included in everything. And there it is. The perfect misunderstanding that destroys more relationships than infidelity ever could. You want to know why women test? Because masculine energy that constantly seeks permission isn't masculine at all. It's a child in a man's body, asking mommy if it's okay to exist. And nobody, listen to me, nobody wants to fuck their own child. The ancient Greeks had a word, autarkeia, self-sufficiency of the soul. Not isolation, but the ability to be whole unto yourself. Modern men have replaced this with something diseased, the desperate need to be enough for her. But here's what Nietzsche knew, what Jung knew, what every broken man discovers too late. You will never be enough for someone else until you're enough for yourself. And if you're truly enough for yourself, the question of being enough for her becomes irrelevant. I watched a couple in a cafe yesterday. Watched with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying a dying species. Every time she picked up her phone, his entire body language shifted. Shoulders forward when she smiled at the screen, backward when she frowned. He was a marionette, and she didn't even know she was holding the strings. When she left for the bathroom, he sat there like an empty coat, waiting to be worn again. This is what we've become. Walking reaction machines. Our entire emotional ecosystem dependent on feminine weather patterns. She sighs, and we scramble to fix something. She laughs, and we repeat the joke forever. She cries, and we panic like the world is ending. Because for us, it is. Here's a delicious bit of darkness from a 2024 psychological study that nobody talks about. Women's attraction decreases in direct proportion to how much their validation affects their partner's mood. Read that again. The more you need her approval, the less she can give it. It's not cruelty, it's physics. You can't lean on something that's leaning on you. Somebody has to be the fucking wall. But walls don't need constant reassurance that they're walls, do they? They just stand there, being what they are, indifferent to whether anyone notices. Jung wrote about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. For modern men, the ultimate shadow is this: the capacity to disappoint a woman and survive, to be disliked and not disintegrate, to stand in the full force of feminine displeasure and say, I hear you, but I'm not changing course. Try it sometime, I dare you. The next time she tests you, and she will, because the universe demands it, don't scramble to pass. Don't defend, explain, or adjust. Just be. Watch what happens when you stop trying to see yourself in her eyes and start seeing yourself through your own. But I warn you, it's terrifying. Like that Romanian shepherd, you might discover that without her reflection, you're not sure what's there. And that's exactly the point. That emptiness, that terrifying void where your sense of self should be, that's where the real work begins. So tell me, my friend who seeks understanding in all the wrong mirrors, when you strip away her perception of you, her validation, her approval, what remains? If the answer is nothing, then you've discovered why the tests never end. You can't pass a test when you don't exist outside of it. The cosmic joke? The moment you stop needing to pass her tests is the moment you finally do. But by then, you won't care. You'll be too busy existing. Why men embalm what they claim to love. Shh. Lean in closer. I need to whisper this one, for the walls themselves recoil from such truths. In the Museum of Broken Things, yes, it exists, hidden in Prague's twisted alleys. There's an exhibit nobody talks about. Glass cases filled with preserved moments. A laugh crystallized mid-air. A first kiss suspended in amber. The exact shade of her eyes the moment she said, I love you. Men pay fortunes to visit, to touch the glass, to weep over what they murdered by trying to keep alive. You see, my exhausted friend, there's something in the masculine psyche that cannot bear the fluid nature of the feminine. We are builders of monuments, creators of systems, lovers of what stays still long enough to be understood. But she is water laughing at your containers, wind mocking your architecture, fire consuming your careful plans. So what do? We kill what we love through preservation. Like those Victorian gentlemen who pinned butterflies to boards, admiring their beauty while wondering why they no longer flew. Jung knew this sickness intimately. In his personal journals, the ones his estate still fights to keep sealed, he wrote, "Man's greatest tragedy is not that he cannot possess woman, but that in trying to possess her, he destroys precisely what he sought to capture. He is King Midas in reverse, turning gold into lead with every grasping touch." I'll tell you about Thomas. Successful lawyer, sharp mind, thought he'd found the one. She was wild when he met her, dancing barefoot in thunderstorms, laughing at inappropriate moments, changing her hair color with the seasons. He loved her chaos, until he didn't. Slowly, methodically, he began the preservation process. Maybe don't laugh so loud. That dress is a bit much for dinner with my colleagues. Do you really need another hobby? 3 years later, she was perfect, predictable, appropriate, dead behind the eyes. He'd successfully taxidermied the woman he loved, then complained to his therapist that the passion was gone. The therapist, who'd seen this tragedy 1,000 times, simply asked, "What did you expect? Corpses don't dance." This is why women test. They're checking if you're another mortician in disguise, another collector of beautiful corpses. Each test is really asking, will you love me alive, with all my chaos and contradiction? Or do you need me stuffed and mounted above your emotional fireplace? A 2024 study on relationship decay found something horrifying. The behavior men most reward in early relationships, spontaneity, emotional intensity, unpredictability, are the exact behaviors they systematically extinguish through subtle punishment and withdrawal once they feel secure. We literally train the wildness out of them, then wonder where the magic went. Here's a Danish fairy tale they've sanitized for children, but I'll tell you the real version. A fisherman catches a magical sea woman. She agrees to marry him on one condition. He must never try to make her fully human. For years, they're happy, but slowly, he grows embarrassed by her strangeness. He hides her scales, burns her kelp clothes, teaches her to walk without that otherworldly sway. One day, he comes home to find her in the bathtub, drowning in air, having forgotten how to breathe water. She dies trying to be what he needed. The masculine wound is this. We say we want a goddess, but prepare only furniture for a maid. We claim to seek mystery, but bring flashlights to the seance. We beg for passion, then complain about the mess. Watch how a man loves, and you'll see the preservation process in real time. He meets her at her most vibrant, usually when she's focused on her own life, glowing with purpose that has nothing to do with him. Enchanted, he pursues, wins her. Then immediately begins the slow suffocation. Why do you need girls' nights? Your friend Sarah is a bad influence. You don't need that promotion. I make enough for both of us. Those books are filling your head with ideas. Each request seems reasonable in isolation. Each clip of the wings so small she barely notices. Until one day she wakes up in a cage so perfectly sized to her diminished form that everyone, including her, believes she chose it. But here's what men miss in their obsession with control. The feminine doesn't test to torture. She tests to stay alive. Every shit test, every emotional storm, every moment of irrational behavior is her psyche fighting against the formaldehyde, refusing to hold still for your comfort. Schopenhauer wrote, "We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves in order to be like other people." But in relationships, men demand women forfeit 4/4, leaving nothing but a pleasant echo where a person used to be. I know a woman, brilliant physicist, published poet, spoke 4 languages, who married a man who loved her mind. Within 5 years, she was discussing nothing deeper than meal plans. Not because he ever said stop thinking. No, it was subtler. A slight glazing of the eyes when she talked about quantum mechanics. A subject change when she mentioned her writing. 1,000 micro-abandonments until she learned, my fullness is too much. I must portion myself out in digestible bites. The perverse thing. He left her for being boring. This is the masculine paradox. We're attracted to wildfire, then spend our relationships trying to turn it into a candle. Safe, contained, useful, controllable. Then we have the audacity to complain about the lack of heat. Jung's concept of the anima, the inner feminine, explains this perfectly. Men who haven't integrated their own feminine aspects cannot tolerate it in others. They're like people who've never learned to swim trying to love the ocean. All they can think to do is build walls against the waves. So she tests to see if you're strong enough to love her without simplifying her. Tests to see if you can dance with chaos without trying to choreograph it. Tests to see if you want a living woman or just another beautiful corpse for your collection. Here's your question, and I want you to feel it in your bones. When she's too much, too emotional, too complicated, too changeable, is your first instinct to expand your capacity to hold her or to shrink her down to fit your limitations? Because that answer, that's everything. That's the difference between love and sophisticated murder. The tests will continue until you prove you can love something without needing to understand it, control it, or preserve it. Until you can say, with your whole being, be as wild as you need to be. I'm not going anywhere. But most of you won't. Most of you will keep building beautiful cages, wondering why the birds inside won't sing. Where pain becomes currency and victimhood pays compound interest. Listen to me, you beautiful disaster of a human being. I'm about to tell you why your suffering is the most addictive drug you'll ever taste, and why her tests are just checking if you're still using. In the underground therapy circles of Berlin, the ones where they serve absinthe instead of tea, there's a phrase they use, Leidenswährung, the suffering currency. It's what men trade for intimacy when they've forgotten how to offer anything else. Watch closely at any gathering of modern men, and you'll see the auction begin. My ex was borderline, destroyed my credit, and keyed my car. That's nothing. Mine cheated with my brother. Amateur hour. Mine faked a pregnancy, then a miscarriage, then stole my dog. Each story a bid for sympathy, each wound a commodity. They've discovered something horrible and true. In our therapeutic age, trauma is the only currency that guarantees attention. And attention, for the emotionally famished, feels close enough to love. Jung saw this coming. In a letter to a colleague in 1958, he wrote, "The modern man has replaced the hero's journey with the victim's marathon. He no longer asks, 'What dragon must I slay?' but 'What dragon has slain me, and how can I make others pay for my death?' But here's the cosmic joke that makes the gods laugh until they weep. Women test traumatized men harder. Not from cruelty, but from an ancient biological imperative that says, if you're still bleeding from the last battle, how can you protect me in the next one? Yet men have learned, oh how they've learned, that bleeding gets you nursed, that wounds get you held, that damage gets you loved, at least temporarily, by women who confuse compassion with attraction. So they pick at their scabs, keeping them fresh, walking around like open wounds in designer jeans. I knew a man, brilliant surgeon, hands that could rebuild hearts, who introduced himself at parties by talking about his abusive childhood within 10 minutes. Every single time. He wore his trauma like a Rolex, checking it constantly, making sure everyone noticed. Women would flock to him, drawn by the savior complex he deliberately triggered. 3 months later, they'd flee, exhausted by the endless need for emotional labor. And he'd add another story to his collection. She abandoned me, just like my mother. The suffering economy works like this. Men trade pain for pussy, women trade fixing for feeling needed, and everyone wonders why the exchange rate keeps getting worse. A 2025 study on trauma bonding in modern relationships revealed something that should be carved into stone. Relationships that begin with one partner in the wounded healer role have a 91% failure rate. But here's the kicker. The wounded party rarely learns. They just find another healer, another savior, another woman to disappoint when she realizes she's signed up to be a girlfriend, not a rehabilitation center. Here's a Sufi teaching that nobody understands anymore. The wound is where the light enters, but only if you stop living in the wound. Modern men have built entire mansions in their wounds, decorated them, invited guests over to admire the architecture of their damage. She tests because she needs to know, are you going to heal, or are you going to make your wounds your identity? Are you a man who happened to suffer, or are you suffering that happens to wear a man's face? The perverse thing about the suffering economy is that it works, temporarily. Damaged men do get laid. Broken attracts broken like magnets finding their match. But it's masturbation disguised as intimacy, two people using each other's wounds to get off on the familiar taste of pain. Watch what happens when a traumatized man meets a healthy woman. She doesn't respond to his pain with the expected cocktail of sympathy and arousal. She says things like, "That sounds difficult. Have you talked to someone about it?" And he's confused, angry even. Where's his fix? Where's the woman who will make it all better with her magical vagina and endless patience? So he escalates, makes the stories worse, adds details, performs his damage like Shakespeare in the park, waiting for applause that never comes. And when she tests him, asks him to show up as something other than his trauma, he accuses her of being cold, unfeeling, just like all the others. Here's what Kierkegaard knew that modern psychology has forgotten. You can build an entire identity on what happened to you, or you can build one on what you're becoming despite what happened to you. Guess which one passes the feminine test? I'll tell you something that will sound cruel until you understand its liberation. Your suffering is not special. Whatever happened to you, the cheating, the abandonment, the abuse, has happened to millions. The universe didn't single you out for unique torture. You're not Job, and this isn't a cosmic test of faith. You're just another human who got hurt and decided to make a career out of it. The feminine tests to see if you've graduated from the university of your own pain or if you're still enrolled. Taking the same course over and over, failing the final exam, but loving the familiar desk. There's an indigenous Australian practice where young men go walkabout. They face hunger, thirst, predators, the vast indifference of the desert. When they return, they never speak of what happened. Not because it's secret, but because they understand. The suffering was just the doorway. What matters is who walked back through it. Modern men go on walkabout through therapy, self-help seminars, ayahuasca ceremonies. But they come back and won't shut up about the journey. They've missed the entire point. The suffering was supposed to transform you, not become your LinkedIn bio. So here's my question. You collector of wounds, you connoisseur of your own pain. When she tests you tomorrow, and she will, because life is testing incarnate, will you respond from your scars or from your strength? Will you show her who you're becoming? Or will you pull out your suffering resume one more time, hoping pain still trades for love in this inflated economy? Because I'll tell you a secret. The moment you stop needing your trauma, the moment you thank it for the lessons and let it go, something miraculous happens. You become someone worth testing. You become someone who can pass. But most of you won't let go. The suffering is too familiar, too safe. It's easier to be broken than to risk being whole and discovering you still aren't enough. At least trauma gives you an excuse. The tests continue, waiting for you to finally arrive as yourself. Not your story, not your wounds, not your carefully curated damage. Just you. Terrifying, isn't it? How the death of false hope births authentic power. And so we arrive at the end, my fellow wanderer in the wasteland of modern love. But endings, as Jung knew, are just beginnings wearing disguises. Let me tell you about the most beautiful disappointment you'll ever experience, if you have the courage to let it destroy you properly. There's a monastery in Tibet where they practice something called disappointing the ego to death. For 7 years, monks sit with their greatest hope, feeding it, nurturing it, building entire worlds around it. Then, in one ceremonial moment, they watch it die. Not dramatically. That would be too kind. It dies slowly, of natural causes, while they hold its hand and whisper, "Thank you." This is what happens when a man finally understands the ultimate truth about feminine testing. You will never, ever, ever be enough. And that's the best news you'll receive in this lifetime. Let that sink in like poison that turns out to be medicine. You will never be enough. Not because you're inadequate, but because enough is a destination that doesn't exist. It's like trying to reach the horizon. The closer you get, the further it moves. The game is rigged, has always been rigged, will always be rigged. And that's not a bug in the system. That's the feature. Jung wrote in his final years something so dangerous they kept it out of his collected works. Man achieves his greatest power not when he finally becomes enough, but when he realizes he never needed to be. The tests end not when you pass them, but when you understand they were never about you. I'll tell you about James. Spent 20 years trying to be the perfect man. Read every book, attended every workshop, optimized himself like he was debugging code. Fit, successful, emotionally intelligent, spiritually aware. The complete package. And still, the tests came. Still, she found fault. Still, he wasn't enough. One winter night, something in him just broke. But not in the way things usually break. It broke like an egg breaks to release the bird. He looked at his wife across their perfect dinner table in their perfect house with their perfect life and said, "I'm done trying to be enough for you. I'm going to be myself instead. Stay or go." She stayed, not because he'd finally passed the test, but because he'd finally understood there was nothing to pass. The tests continued, but they no longer mattered. He'd found something better than her approval, his own existence. This is the sacred disappointment. The realization that you've been playing a game that can't be won, competing in a race with no finish line, trying to fill a bucket with no bottom. And in that disappointment, that divine, crushing, liberating disappointment, you find the only freedom worth having. A 2025 longitudinal study on relationship satisfaction found something that made researchers question their own sanity. Men who reported giving up on trying to satisfy their partners showed the highest levels of both individual happiness and, here's the kicker, partner satisfaction. The men who stopped trying to be enough became more than enough by accident. But it's not about becoming an asshole. That's the mistake angry men make. They think disappointment means disconnection. No, it's about understanding what the Zen masters knew. You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement. Both things true simultaneously, neither canceling the other out. The feminine doesn't test to find your perfection. She tests to find your authenticity. And authenticity includes imperfection, includes failure, includes the radical acceptance of your own insufficiency. She's not looking for a god. She's looking for a man who's made peace with not being one. Here's a story from the Kabbalah that rabbis only whisper. When God created the universe, the vessels meant to hold divine light shattered. Too much light, too little container. The shards scattered everywhere, each carrying a spark of the original radiance. Humanity's job isn't to rebuild the vessels, it's to gather the sparks, broken pieces and all. You are a shard pretending to be a vessel. She knows it, you know it. The tests are just checking if you'll admit it. The sacred disappointment transforms everything. When you stop trying to be her everything, you become something. When you stop needing to pass her tests, you realize the test was seeing if you'd stop needing to pass. When you disappoint her expectations and survive, you discover your own shape for the first time. I met a man last month who radiated something I rarely see. Contentment. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but deep, bone-level contentment. His wife had left him after 15 years. She said I'd never be the man she needed, he told me, smiling like he was sharing good news. Took me 2 years to realize she was right. I'll never be the man she needed. I'll only ever be the man I am, and that's enough for me. He's dating again. The women who meet him sense something different. He doesn't audition for their approval. He doesn't perform his worth. He doesn't promise to be anything other than what he is. Some leave immediately. Others stay, fascinated by a man who isn't trying to sell them anything. The tests? They still come. But now they're like weather. Sometimes pleasant, sometimes storms, always passing. He doesn't take them personally anymore. How can you take rain personally? This is what awaits on the other side of the sacred disappointment. The end of performance. The death of the false self. The birth of something real and strange and utterly unsellable in the modern romantic marketplace. But here's the final paradox, the last twist of the knife that turns out to be a key. When you truly, deeply, authentically stop caring about passing her tests, when you accept your cosmic insufficiency with the same grace you'd accept gravity, something magical happens. You become exactly what she was testing for all along. Not a perfect man, not a finished product, not someone who has transcended human limitation. Just a human being who has stopped apologizing for being human. A man who can hold space for her chaos because he's made peace with his own. A partner who can dance with her complexity because he's stopped trying to simplify himself. The tests never end because life never stops asking what you're made of. But when you've been disappointed properly, when you've let the dream of enough die in your arms, you discover something better than passing grades. You discover yourself, and that messy, imperfect, never quite enough self. That's what she was looking for all along. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And in a world of performers and pretenders, reality is the rarest aphrodisiac of all. So, here's my final question, delivered with all the tenderness I can muster for your beautiful, doomed attempts at perfection. Are you ready to disappoint everyone, including yourself, into freedom? Are you prepared to fail so spectacularly at being enough that you accidentally become yourself? The sacred disappointment awaits. It tastes like ashes and births phoenixes. Welcome to the beginning disguised as an end.